Hello, and welcome to Life, Love, etc., a show that explores all aspects of life, connection, and success. I'm Anna Elton, your host and a clinical expert in marriage and family therapist and sexology. Have you ever felt like you don't belong, you're not good enough, or your success is just pure luck? Well, you're not alone. This is imposter syndrome in practice. This show is presented live by Jess TV. Stay tuned. And please welcome our guest, Nevena Tomic.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here. So let's talk about you. Let's explore who you are, tell us your story, and we're gonna dive into imposter syndrome, what it is, how it's impacting our lives, and most importantly, what to do about it.
Yes, well, I am beyond excited. I've been waiting all day to jump on this with you. I am a big fan of everything you guys are doing, so thank you for having me. My name's Nevena Tomic. I run a cosmetics company. I am a mom. I've got 2 boys. And of course, just like Anna mentioned, I have fallen victim to imposter syndrome myself. And when I heard about tonight's episode, I thought to myself, I would love to share some of my real life experiences of what I've been through. And, I think this is a topic that resonates with so many people in the audience. I'm based in St. Petersburg, Florida. And one of the main things that I have been dealing with most recently, I'll talk a lot about tonight, which ties back to imposter syndrome. For me, it really kind of led to a new passion of mine. So while imposter syndrome can appear to be negative and kind of this like dark cloud, it also has been a light in my life that helped me really uncover who I really am. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I know you do a lot, right? As you mentioned, you're a mom, you're a business owner, you also participate in pageants. Can you share a little bit about pageants? And I know I've been there, and I know even in pageantry, right? When you try something new, you don't feel like you don't belong. You feel like you're not good enough. And exciting, your new pageant is coming up as Mrs. Serbia. You will be participating in Mrs. World. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Have you been preparing? Is imposter syndrome been coming up at pageantry for you, or it's something that you feel like you're able to overcome?
Yes, well, that's how I met you, was in the pageant industry. It's funny, I didn't start doing pageants until I was married, which is like not normal. A lot of people do pageants before they get married. I have 2 beautiful boys, and to be honest with you, I really wanted to jump into pageantry because that was when I was able to uncover my lifelong mission, which is educating women and men about the harmful chemicals in household products that lead to long-term illnesses. In 2020, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma cancer, which is a skin cancer. But in 2015 is when I began my mission. And so, it's an interesting story where I was able to uncover my lifelong mission well before my family member was diagnosed with this illness. And so pageantry really helps me stay connected to many different organizations and humanitarian efforts that help me push one message forward, which is we need to be able to protect our youth, our family, and our future from all of the different things being put in household products that eventually can lead to different long-term implications. And like I said, I met you through pageantry. I've met so many amazing women. And to answer your original question, when you asked me, have I dealt with imposter syndrome in pageantry? 1000%. I have never been a pageant girl. I felt like I was the newbie. Even I remember when I competed against you, I was just like in awe at how amazing you were. And I think that's where imposter syndrome comes in, is you put yourself into a vulnerable position where you want to try something new. And you think that it's going to be a particular experience of, I can do this. Mm-hmm. Imposter syndrome for me in pageantry absolutely kicked in, because it wasn't until that moment when I stepped foot around all these high performing competitors who have experience, who are very talented. And I thought to myself, do I fit in here? I have never done this. I'm not as experienced as they are. I'm bringing a very different cup of tea to, the table. And I think a lot of people deal with that when A, they're starting new positions.
Mm-hmm.
B, they're deciding to begin an adventure that they've never even considered before in the past. C, it could be outside of their normal family dynamics. And D, it can also happen when you're deciding to switch industries. A lot of us go to school for one particular specialty, and we can encounter imposter syndrome once we get into the workplace, because sometimes your entry-level job may not correlate back to what you went to school for, and that's okay. We're evolving, we're growing.
And we feel like, what am I doing here, right?
Absolutely. I think everybody can probably pinpoint 3 to 5 experiences where they've dealt with that. So the simple answer is absolutely. I've dealt with it not only in pageantry, but I would say in probably, like I said, 3 or 4 other major pillars in my life where I thought to myself, does this fit who I am? Do I belong?
And again, imposter syndrome can appear in your schooling, in your workplace, in relationships, right? Because I see clients all the time coming in and saying, I feel like my partner will expose me. I'm not feeling good enough. And where's this imposter syndrome is coming from, right? It's not because you don't have the abilities. Sometimes it can be because you're just putting yourself in a new place, right? And you're pushing yourself to get to the next level, right? To level up, as kids say nowadays. And that means that you are growing and you're exploring your growth mindset. Yeah. So let me ask you, let's talk about, pageantry a little bit more. Since you're preparing, tell us about what is something that's been exciting, helpful, to feel that you're good enough, you're doing a great job. Were there moments where you're saying, like, what am I doing here? Why didn't I sign up for this, right? Sometimes we have that feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I learned through my experience of dealing with imposter syndrome, definitely in this particular experience of holding the title of Mrs. Serbia, was I decided to surround myself and build a support group that I felt could help keep me up in the moments where I began to feel self-doubt. So I ended up having a coach who was able to reignite my flame whenever I felt that it was being put out, whether it was, whatever the situation may have been. I also think that building a support group, whether it's friends, family, coworkers, a therapist, or whoever it may be, where you can be vulnerable and share what you're feeling, and know that you've kind of got that proper support to be able to help you move forward. So for me, it was, like I said, leaning into a coach, building a really strong foundation. And to be honest with you, my spouse is a really big part of it, because a lot of times he's the one who sees me in my day-to-day, and he's the one who can pinpoint when I'm feeling down or feeling imposter syndrome in pageants. And he's the one who helps me brings me back to what was the reason I decided to do it in the first place, which I sometimes forget. And it's funny, we did another interview a couple months ago, and the host asked my husband, how do you feel about her doing pageants? Mm-hmm. And he said, it's funny because she started doing it after we got married, and it was something that I never thought I would experience in my marriage. And she said, well, how do you feel about her doing this? And he said, I'm okay with it as long as she's having fun. And I think with imposter syndrome, a lot of times we get into situations thinking this is going to be fun. And imposter syndrome sometimes takes you down a road of this isn't fun anymore.
It's a lot of work. And I don't know what I'm doing, right? I don't know.
Exactly. And I think just getting back to your why And getting back to your core of like, why did you begin this in the first place is whether you write it down on a sticky note or, tape yourself talking about it or having your friends really bring it back is an important part of keeping that at the forefront of why you're moving into new adventures.
So it sounds like whenever you start going too fast, you need to stop, pause, right? Like take a step back and remind yourself, I'm doing this because, and then remember your why, right? Taking yourself back to the basics.
Exactly. And it's funny, I was kind of prepping for our call and I read a fact where it said 70 to 80% of people experience imposter syndrome. So you're not alone when you are dealing with this. Know that the person sitting right next to you on the train or on the bus or in the street, whatever you're doing, has also been there as well and has dealt with exactly what you're dealing with. So just knowing that you're not alone, I think could be a comforting factor as well.
Absolutely. And again, this is not just someone who is not capable, right? We have great examples of Marie Curie, right? The woman who got her first Nobel Prize is a woman, right? Albert Einstein, right? We have so many like CEOs who felt imposter syndrome at some point, right? I guess that's why we have executive coaching, right? We need someone who will be there behind you and remind you, you got this, keep moving, you're doing a great job.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's really important. So those are kind of the main things that I leaned into, and personality coaches and whatever therapists. I mean, there's so many resources out there, especially nowadays. Even just hopping on YouTube and doing your own research of how can I get through these experiences, I think is a really important part of the process as well.
So let me ask you, how about like success, right? When do you feel like you feel successful versus when you're not good enough? Is there any signs? So how would you define success for yourself?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think that a lot of times when you're in a situation when you're dealing with imposter syndrome, the times that you feel like everything is okay is maybe when you're getting some recognition, right? So like sometimes people are waiting for that little glimmer of hope when somebody turns to you and says, "Wow, you did a really great job," and then things start to kind of melt away, the layers of doubt and negativity. So I think a lot of times just kind of that recognition or some kind of validation. Unfortunately, we seek it from other people. Sometimes the ones closest to us, and sometimes it could be people who have no immediate connection to your day-to-day life. But yeah, I think in some way, even in these social media days that we currently live in, a lot of times we are kind of looking for that piece of validation that says you're doing it right, or you're doing a good job.
So that's why we keep posting, right? For likes and comments, right? Like and subscribe. But we want to make sure that we also can produce that internal validation, right?
Right.
That we can say like, and as I tell my clients, there's one mantra that I always do to myself and I teach my clients. I always say to myself, who is awesome? I'm awesome. Who is awesome? I'm awesome.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And I think that's really important to teach the kids these days too. We've moved away from kind of those core values of embedding in our children and in our youth that validation really should come internally. And I think you hit it right. You hit the nail right on the head where it's like, while we are looking for validation in our jobs and in these, different experiences, but at the end of the day, we have to be at peace with who we are and know that you are enough. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that's growth that doesn't happen immediately, right? And it's a journey to be able to get to what you just said, that I'm great, I'm good, I'm enough. Sometimes it may take years. It may take different experiences to get there. But as long as we get there, then that's really what matters.
And I feel like the starting point, you need to start believing yourself that you are awesome, right? Because I feel like sometimes when clients start saying it, they don't believe it fully. But then once they start saying it over and over again, eventually they start believing it. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately with the social media and our digital age, we have the social comparison, right? It's so easy to go online and see other people, see celebrities, compare yourself, see someone who I went to school with and see where they are at and where you're at, right? And you're thinking like, am I doing a good job? And what I always remind my clients is you are your own person and you have your own path. So don't compare yourself to anyone else. Don't look back. Don't worry about the future. Stay now, and that's how you can do one day at a time, one foot in front of another. Just keep swimming.
Absolutely.
That's all you can
I definitely agree. I mean, if you think about the definition of success for each of us, it really changes every 10 years. What I thought was success in my 20s looks very different to what I thought success was in my 30s. And as I'm moving into my 40s, success is completely different than, the last 20 years. So, it's an evolving chapter and really an evolving definition of what success is for you. And I think, a lot of times with imposter syndrome, by the time you get over your imposter syndrome, you may have already encountered so much personal growth that you're on to another adventure where you're now starting at the beginning of, a new job or a new situation where you're now going to deal with imposter syndrome in a different way. So it could shift every decade, is kind of what I've noticed for myself.
Absolutely. So I want to remind our viewers, I'm Anna Elton, and we have our guest, Nevena Tomic. So as we continue talking about imposter syndrome, let's talk about I guess, where did it start? Like, do you remember when was the first time you felt imposter syndrome? Was it school? Was it career? Was it somewhere else in relationship? I just want to kind of bring a couple of examples so we can all relate and, just normalize it, that we all experience it and we're all in it together.
Exactly. To be honest with you, I think that the lack of knowledge of what imposter syndrome was led to me actually not acknowledging that I was going through it and not knowing that I was going through it for many, many years. The first time where I was able to stop and say, okay, I am noticing that I'm feeling X, Y, and Z was in 2020 when I became a licensed caregiver for my father. My background has been beauty, fashion. I've always worked in, cosmetics and those industries. In 2020, when my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I made the decision to become a licensed caregiver. And that was moving from the fashion industry to really now the medical industry. I was not trained in it. I had no experience in it. But the only thing I knew was that I had to do this and that my dad's, unfortunately, his life depended on it. I knew that he did not want anybody else taking care of him. I knew that this was going to be the best decision for our family. And I began to feel severe imposter syndrome because I kept thinking to myself, I know I want to do this. I know he wants me to do this. This is the right thing to do. But I've never done anything remotely close to this. I am not educated in this industry. While I did the caregiving classes, I passed everything. I got my license. I signed up with an agency. I began to realize that I had just signed up for the biggest journey I could have ever signed up for. And at that point, I began to realize that I needed to shift the way I viewed this particular journey. I knew that I needed to begin educating myself. I needed to change my personality. My entire life changed. And with imposter syndrome came self-doubt, continuous anxiety at night. I had trouble sleeping because it was keeping me up at night. Like, should I have a nurse do it? Should I do it? He ended up he moved in with us. And I was running different scenarios in my mind. I began to notice that more of the negative thoughts started coming in my mind of like, can I handle what's coming ahead, right, with all of this? Going from the fashion industry to more of a hands-on role where you're dealing with medicine and dealing with doctors and learning about how our body responds to different treatments and things like that. There were so many times when I thought to myself, I have no idea what I'm talking about when the doctors would call me. And we're talking about topics that are, you know, fight or flight for my dad. I remember a particular conversation where my father's doctor called me and said, "We have a clinical trial. Do you want your dad to try it?" And that imposter syndrome kicked in. I stopped mid conversation and thought to myself, I don't even know how to answer this, but I need to figure it out fast. And so, that was really the first time where I began to notice that I was adjusting to imposter syndrome. Absolutely. Over time, I became more comfortable with the situation and I became more independent and I felt like I can do this. I felt like now I'm in the hang of things. I actually learned so much that I actually feel like I'm a subject matter expert now. In the beginning, I would have never thought that because I never wanted to be in the medical realm. I never thought I would have to be put in this situation. And to be honest with you, I find myself now constantly speaking to people who are going through the exact same situation and giving them hope and advice and giving them my experience. So I'm glad I didn't let imposter syndrome change my original decision of why I signed up to do what I did.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But again, like in many cases, we tend to allow imposter syndrome to control us, right? And then we don't try something, right? We don't step into the role. But it sounds like in your case, it's almost like you gave yourself no choice, right? You told yourself, like, I have to do this.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in this situation, it was more high tense than like starting a new job and saying to myself, like, imposter syndrome is kicking in. Should I keep this job? Right? Like, this is a family member. This is a very severe situation. But to your point, I did internally have to like have conversations with myself to say, like, keep going. You can do this. Even if you make a bad decision, it will be okay. You've got people who are there to support you. You've got education at your fingertips with the internet. Ask questions, get through it. And I found my stride. And I think a lot of people find their stride in the journey of imposter syndrome. They overcome the barriers in their, the roadblocks in their path. And I think that's an important piece. Now, what I will say is the times that I think imposter syndrome can be negative is when it's impacting your mental and physical health, right? Like, I don't want to put out this message that you can do it and you can always get through it. There may be times where you do have to say, you know what? It's impacting me mentally. It's impacting me physically. It's not good. And I have to step away. And I think that's okay too. Mm-hmm. And as a therapist, you probably know how to coach somebody through that. But that's the other side of the coin that we deal with.
Absolutely. And again, this is where you get your support system, but also your support system can be someone who give you that, the real check, right? Like, am I doing okay? Or like, what are my signs that I'm not doing well, mm-hmm. right? Am I being, too reactive, right? Am I getting, more frequent anxiety, sadness, right? Maybe doing the mood log just to see what's going on for you, just to assess the situation. There are different ways. And now with technology, we have all these apps that we can utilize just to see where we are mentally.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes people hit situations where they may have imposter syndrome going on in different avenues in their life where it's too much, right? Like, you may be feeling it at work, you may be feeling it in your relationship, And then you feel like, okay, this is too much. Like, and I think a lot of people deal with that too, where it's coming from many different places in your life, and you need to kind of buckle down and say, like, okay, how am I going to prioritize this? Because I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm not happy in my relationship. I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. I'm, work. I just got promoted and I'm feeling imposter syndrome. I don't know if this was the right decision. Like, sometimes it's kind of this overlapping scenario where it's coming from different directions.
So it could be that multi-layered imposter syndrome. But one thing that I would say, what you can do in this scenario, you can think of like, what is stable? What do you feel like is going well? Again, going back to the basics, taking a step back and just assessing. Where can I start with? Like if, am I doing well? Maybe I'm exercising, right? Maybe I'm going to the gym on a regular basis. That's a good thing, right? Or is my relationship with my partner is going well? That's a stable place. Or I have a supporting boss at job. So maybe I can, ask for help there. And again, one thing I always recommend, please ask for help and accept help. I think it's super, super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, asking people, how am I doing? Asking for feedback is like, sometimes we think we're not doing a good job in particular scenarios. And then once you kind of peel back the onion and speak to different people, you begin to realize like, oh, wow, this scenario is not what I thought it was. And I think sometimes just asking for feedback of what am I doing well? What could I improve on? I think could also help with your imposter syndrome as well, especially in the workplace.
But what's interesting with imposter syndrome. Sometimes it's not that you're not doing well. It just you don't view your performance as being good enough, right? And again, it's going back to the childhood. It could be coming from your upbringing, the way you viewed yourself, your low self-esteem, right? And then just, even if you're doing an amazing job, you feel like you're not doing enough. And again, going back to that, maybe nightly gratitude or positive feedback to yourself, right? If you can think of one thing that you did well or something that you're proud of. And then the more you do it, the more you believe in it.
Yeah.
Or maybe reframing the negative thoughts, right? Is there any recurrent negative thoughts that you have about yourself? Mm-hmm. Write them down and think, how can you challenge that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, which is the accomplishments part, right? And maybe with that comes setting accomplishments that you want to achieve throughout a journey, so that helps with the imposter syndrome too. Because if you, set 3 achievements or goals in the beginning of a new experience or a new job or a new relationship or whatever it may be, I would think that could also help ease the feelings that you may have throughout as you hit each pillar and say, wow, I just hit the first check mark. This is the accomplishment I set for myself. I was able to hit it in 3 months. That's great. And so maybe there's a planning part of all of this that makes you feel a little bit more, have a little bit more compassion towards yourself.
But what's interesting, even if we set the goals, we reach the goals. Most of the time we forget to celebrate successes, right? We keep going and going and going and like, yeah, we did it. And then we say the next goal, the next goal, the next goal, right? And then when we step on the new role, that's when we feel imposter syndrome again, right? As soon as we start to feel comfortable again, then we reach the next goal and we forget to pause and say, hey, I'm doing really well.
Yeah.
Who is awesome? I'm awesome. Let's keep moving, right? But then sometimes we just go, 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 go. And then we're like, I don't know what I did. I have nothing to show for. Where in reality, you have a lot going on, right? Mm-hmm. And you should be really proud of your accomplishments so far.
Yeah. Why do you think people, I find myself victim of doing that too. Like, why do people feel the need to have to continuously sign up for new things versus just feeling like, right now, if I don't have very much going on, that's okay too. I often question for myself too, and my family will say to me too, like, why do you keep adding new things in? Why can't you just have like downtime? And because to your point, what I'm beginning to realize is with new opportunities and new things, I'm really setting myself up to deal with the things we're talking about tonight, mm-hmm. which is imposter syndrome. And so as I move into my next phase of my life, I'm beginning to question, like, why is it that we do that to ourselves?
Well, most of the time, success is addictive, right? And then when we reach that high, right, we feel a lot of dopamine and we have endorphins, right? It feels good to overcome certain things, right? To feel good and successful. So we want to keep going. And then if we know what's going on, it's not interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's comfortable, you know what to expect, but it's not exciting anymore.
Right.
So, and also, when we think of success, we set one goal, right? And when you're thinking, I just want to get one thing and that's it. But then as you go, your goals continue to increase, right? And then, you start with one small thing now, a year later, 2 years later, 10 years from now, right? You're like way over the goals that you originally set for yourself.
Exactly. I mean, I think we've all done that, right? Like
Mhm.
you embark on one journey and then to your point, it's like you've added three new things you want to do and you're like, that wasn't what I was planning on doing. Um, yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Absolutely. And I love what you said that success is addictive, right? And but I also think, in as we think about our lives and where unforeseen stress can come in. I think for me, like, and I'm sure viewers have gone through this too, where, sometimes you're dealing with imposter syndrome and it's heavy, but then you have another unexpected situation come up in your life that adds this layer of heaviness too. And so I think one thing that, I wonder is, should we be cognizant of what we're embarking on, knowing that there are these other external factors that could make our imposter syndrome feel worse than it is because there's so much going on. I mean, if you think about COVID-19, like during that time, right, that was an unexpected event
Mhm.
that was a layer on top of if you were already dealing with a situation where you were feeling imposter syndrome, and then now you have to deal with this major situation, that's a lot at one time.
Absolutely.
Um,
And then it's not just your health, right? You don't know what's coming for you, but teachers, they had to learn how to teach online, right? Therapists, we had to go overnight on telehealth, right? And there is no explanation, right? There is no guide how to do it. We had to figure this out. And I remember as a therapist, I had a lot of kids that I worked with at that point, and some kids were with autism, they had ADHD, and I'm sitting there and I was like, okay, how can I entertain and teach this child who's 5, 6, 7, 8 for an hour, right? And really, give them new skills, but also them to be present with me because all the tools that we had in the office were not available here, right? In telehealth. So I had to learn, I had to adjust, I had to put on my thinking hat and say like, okay, what can I do differently? And actually out of that, that's how my first book came up for me.
oh wow.
So that's when I feel like with imposter syndrome, what happens, I'm more creative, right? I have this problem that I need to solve. So instead of thinking like I have the problems, I have solutions, right? I don't have any problems. I only have solutions. So I said like, this is what I need to solve. This is the challenge. What can I do about it?
Mhm.
And that's when I realized there's this strategy is externalization, and I will tell you in a second how to do it, how to use it with imposter syndrome as well. So externalization, that's when you take emotion, and it can be anything. I use it with kids, I use it with adults, anything you think. Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it anxiety? Is it not feeling good enough, right? Imposter syndrome. And then you separate it from yourself. You give it a name and shape. For example, let's call this imposter syndrome negative Nancy, right? And then you need to learn like how do you feel when this negative Nancy is coming and trying to control you, right? Is it like when you feel the knots in your stomach? Is it like the headache? What's going on for you, right? And then also, what can you do to scare her away? To say like, hey, listen, Nancy, thanks, but I got it. Move over, right? And that's when you think of that safety plan, right? What can you do to overcome that negative Nancy? And again, there's like some techniques you say like, hey, I can remind myself that I'm doing a good job, right? I can say like, I'm doing amazing, I'm awesome, right? You can give like, make little notes for yourself. You can journal, right? You can maybe just take a step back and ground yourself. And there are different exercises. For example, I mean, there's one that like, it's really interesting. So I guess it was popular in 70s. The new version of this exercise is just like counting backwards, right? If you start to spiral, you just need to start counting backwards from 100, from 50, right? You just say like 100, 99,
Yeah.
98, 97. So what's interesting, what they used to do in 70s, they actually did the mental math, the increments of 7. So let's say you start counting from 50, right? You're really spiraling, you're really anxious. And then you can like, okay, let me calm myself down. So I start with 50 and I say like, okay, 50 increments of 7, 50 minus 7, 43. So I'm going
Mhm.
down
Sure.
49,
Yeah.
48, 47. You get to 43, like, okay, what's my next mental math? Okay, 43 minus 7. You know,
Yeah, getting your mind off of
yeah, and then you
it's
counting.
really a
And then
distraction.
once you get to, 1, then you're kind of like, okay, I don't know what I was even thinking about. I feel fine.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, I think that's it's funny because you're able to talk about like you're able to give us tips on how to overcome it, and what you're really what you're really doing is being able to coach us how to grow personally, right? I mean, that everything you just explained not only helps with imposter syndrome, there's many different life experiences where you can, I would assume, apply these techniques, right? In, panic
absolutely.
attacks, whether it be depression or hyperventilating. I mean, there's so many other things we encounter where like these things could really help somebody in different avenues other than imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. And again, one thing that we all need to remember that we can't feel happy all the time. Feel
Mhm.
happy and confident, right? So if this is the baseline, we can't go like this because just think of the medical field. Like if it goes like this, you're not alive, right? So
Mhm.
like we all go up and down, up and down. So we all can have a little anxious. You can all feel a little sad, right? The problem comes when your ups and downs are too high and too low, right? Because it's harder to bounce back. So we want to make sure that we're keeping ourselves in check, and whenever we start to escalate, we're able to bring ourselves back. Whenever we're going down, we're able to bring ourselves back. But
Mhm.
also we want to give ourselves grace. That it's okay sometimes to feel sad, right? We all feel that. Just go with that. Just remember it's going to be a different day tomorrow. I'll be sad today, but tomorrow will be a new day, right? If we feel anxious, just think of like what's going on. Or one thing that I really like is the circle of control. Whenever I start to think about something and I'm feeling, really worried or anxious, I try to remind myself, is it something I'm able to control or not? So when you think of visual circle, so the inner circle is you. And what you're able to control is what you say, what you do, hopefully what you feel, right? Your values, your actions. What you're not able to control is what other people say, what they do, what they feel, how they act, right? So, and then also we can control weather, we can control traffic, right? We can control illness, we can change the past, we can predict the future. So we need to remind this, right? And then think of those, angry drivers. You're driving, you're rushing to work, and then you're getting so upset and frustrated, and thus they have the road rage, right? But then, what I always remind myself when I start feeling upset, I'm like, I can't really do anything about it right now.
Mhm.
I'll just better relax and turn on music and figure out what I can do differently next time,
Mhm.
right? Or when you completed this assignment and you turn it in, that's it. There's no point of worrying about it because you did your part. It's outside of your control,
Exactly.
right? Or if you're waiting for the job, right, response, and you're kind of like, yep, I did my interview. That's it. I did my best.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's something that well, a lot of people probably struggle with is that control factor. And that's probably why so many people are afraid to fly, right? Because you're surrendering your control. And to your point, the second we step onto an airplane, you can sit there and worry the entire time, which trust me, I have because I hated to fly. But now I fly all over the world. I enjoy the experience because to your point, it was, it's that realization of like, there's even if something's happening, I can't do anything. There's not much, in this particular situation. But I do think that in imposter syndrome, I've noticed that where I began to spiral were the situations where I felt like I couldn't control what was happening. And I felt like I'm not doing well or I can't control this situation. And so because of that, I'm feeling like I don't belong or this isn't the right, experience for me. So I love that you hit on that because before today's call, I actually didn't realize that control is a part of this entire kind of what the syndrome of what feeling that is. So I love that.
Well, I'm glad. Hopefully it will be helpful. At the pageantry, right? It's coming up. When is the Mrs. World coming up?
Yeah, so we leave in 2 weeks, and we'll be in Las Vegas for about a week competing. And then we hit the stage, and just like we talked about tonight, I mean, it's something you really can't control other than your performance. And it's funny because I feel that the best thing I can do in that situation is just have fun. That's the only thing I can control is whether or not I'm going to enjoy the experience. So that'll be the way that I control my imposter syndrome when I get there.
I think maybe that will be a reality check. Am I having fun?
Exactly.
I'm here to enjoy the experience. That's it. Because if I don't enjoy it, what's the point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having internal self checks with myself to say, okay, am I having fun or have I deviated from that fun core that I promised myself I would stay at? So I will commit to that.
Awesome. So let's remind our viewers, we are watching Life, Love, Etc. I'm your host, Anna Elton, and our guest, Nevena Tomic. So let's continue exploring imposter syndrome, and let's look into something. What else can we do, right, when we feel imposter syndrome? I mean, if you can quickly share like some of the thoughts or like some of the quick points when you felt it, and then what did you do?
Yeah. I think that, most recently I've begun noticing kind of in the workplace is where it kind of hits when you're taking on a new role as like a new hire. And for me, some of the things that I've been able to lean into is finding a mentor for myself where I can really kind of discuss my experience and exchange information with a mentor in the workplace. And I think a lot of people in the current day and age have really moved towards assigning mentors for whether it be internships, new hires in the corporate environments where you actually have like a safety blanket of who you can go to. And so that's kind of really been one of the things that I've leaned into because I do have a corporate job. I do work full time for a corporation and I do work for a few other corporate offices as well. And that's really where imposter syndrome hits when there's an overload of information. And I think to myself, okay, how can I digest this? Will I be successful? And am I doing a good job? But sometimes it's really, for me, it's been just identifying like a safety blanket of, a mentor or a friend at work where I feel comfortable sharing my emotions in a safe environment.
Absolutely. So another thing I was thinking that can come out of the imposter syndrome is procrastination, right? And the reason why we can procrastinate because we almost don't know where to start, because we're not feeling good enough, we're not capable, we don't feel confident, right? And we simply don't do anything, right? We just freeze. Maybe we go on social media, we doom scroll, right? And then our assignment, our project is not complete. So some of the things I tell my clients, what you can do is to use SMART goals, right? When you have measurable, specific, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals, right? And I guess the example they always bring is the gym, right? You want to get in shape, you buy the gym membership, but then you never go.
Yeah.
But then maybe you think like, okay, I can go every single day, or like I can go 5 days a week.
Mhm.
And then you start going to the gym and you say like, okay, so my goal is 5 days a week. You go on Monday, you go on Tuesday, you go on Wednesday. Life happens on Thursday, you're not feeling well. Friday, something came up. Saturday, something came up. And then Sunday is your last day. You feel like, what's the point? I only did 3 days. My goal was five. I'm not doing well enough, right? And what happens to our motivation? It goes down, it decreases, right? So, what can be more important? First of all, you need to set smaller goals, aim lower. Even if you can do 5 days, give yourself a goal as 2 days. So, now, same scenario, right? You said, like, I'll do it twice a week, and then you go on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Life happened on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Sunday comes. You go to the gym, and now you're looking at your results and say, like, wow, I plan to go to the gym twice. I went 4 times.
Right.
Who is awesome? I am awesome.
Mhm.
And once you feel more confident, you can add on to your goal, right? It's like running the marathon. You don't just start running marathon. You need to practice for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with procrastination, I think when you said, you freeze, I think, even as a mom, there's been moments where, I remember when I first had my sons and I was feeling like so much was changing. And, I do remember kind of stopping and kind of freezing, like, okay, what do I do now? Like, do I make the food? Do I do, this is a whole new journey. Yeah, and I think that you're right. Setting small goals um, definitely help ease the pain of kind of what you're going to encounter. I think what are your thoughts on like how should you determine the small goals? I think that's where I struggle too. Is like sometimes I think I'm setting a realistic goal, and then when I don't hit it, I'm like, oh well, because I failed, now I need to reevaluate my original goal. Versus what you're saying is like in the beginning, identifying a realistic goal so that you're not setting yourself up for failure.
Well, I guess you need to try just to see
Hmm.
what's your ability, what kind of goal you usually setting up for yourself. For example, so I got this book deal on writing the book, and I was like, oh, got it. Originally it was 300 pages, and I said like, okay, no problem, I'll do it in 3 months. Well, I was doing really well, and then I realized it's harder than I anticipated. And I don't have life happened, right? I'm a mom of three. I'm working, so it's just you don't have enough time. You don't anticipate when kids get sick, something comes up, right? Life happens. So for me, I had to, ask for extension, which they said at the start. They said like, no problem, just tell us what you need. And I said like, give me 3 months. They're like, are you sure it's going to be enough? And I said like, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I plan
Hmm.
it all out. I'm the queen of the schedule, which I am. I'm trying to like have the schedule, but something that I guess, I would say I always need to look out for. I overextend myself,
Hmm.
right? And that's where you think of like, okay, if I'm saying 3 months, I need to give myself at least 4 months. Right?
Right.
If I'm thinking um, that I can do it maybe even 5 months, just to make sure you have that cushion, right? If you can deliver earlier, awesome. If no, then you don't have to stress about it, because that's when anxiety comes in, right? That's when imposter syndrome comes in. That's when you feel like, why did I even sign up for this? I'm not doing well. Like I said, I'll do it in this time frame. I'm not able to do it. So as I said, like with the gym, you feel like you can do 5 days, do 2 days, or like, start with 3 days and then reassess the goal and remind yourself, this is just a trial. Like, let me see, um, you know, see what's going to happen. But remind yourself, I'm doing well, give yourself grace, and just keep going.
Yeah, and what's interesting about your story is when you told, I would assume you the publishing company, that you would do it in 3 months, their reaction was, "Are you sure?"
Mhm.
And the reason why they probably said that was because from their experience, they probably already had enough knowledge to know that while it is realistic, they probably have had many other writers submit for extensions. And
Absolutely.
Right. And so I think a lot of times what we do is, to your point, we overextend ourselves and we neglect to see like the red flags or just the feedback that people are giving us that now I try to pay more attention to. Or the other option is when you're in a situation where you know you're doing something new, it's almost like having a support group of people who have written a book before in the past, which I know you have, but you know what I'm saying. Having a support group of people so that you could go to them and say, like, hey, I want to do this in 3 months. What do you think? And then they come back and say, hey, I think that may be a little overambitious or whatever it may be. So I think sometimes it is just taking a step back and like building a support group where you can go bounce ideas off of or brainstorm, and really know that you can gain some knowledge or information from other individuals who have already walked in those shoes and have experience with what you're about to embark on.
Absolutely. And again, this is where, like, in my case, I knew that I had an option to ask for extension, and they said,
Right.
absolutely take your time. That's why I was not as stressed out. But still, when it hit that time,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I did not deliver, right? And even in the end, I over delivered, right? But for me, like through that journey, I was thinking, I'm not doing a good enough job because I did not meet the unrealistic deadline that I set for myself.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And throughout that journey, it's like you said, by the end of it, you had overachieved. But during that time, what did you feel within yourself? And those feelings were X, Y, and Z, that like maybe weren't even warranted, but you can't help it, right? Because in your mind, you're thinking it was going to go a different way.
But what's interesting, right? I always tell myself and remind my clients, right? You don't dwell on the past because you can't change it, but you can learn from it. So what
Hmm.
did I learn from this experience? That next time when I'm gonna ask for, the contract, I'll ask for 6 months.
Right.
And then when I deliver in 3 or 4 months, I'll say like, woohoo. I did.
Exactly. Right. You'll definitely feel kind of those feelings of achievement. And I think, when I guess the other side of imposter syndrome is that there are kind of pockets of positivity too that like you encounter throughout it as well. Like you mentioned, like the ups and downs, like while you may be down when you're feeling imposter syndrome, like there are those ebbs and flows, like where you said, where you do feel like, oh, okay, things are going better or I'm feeling good. And I think that when you hear imposter syndrome, you are automatically think it's a negative thing.
Mhm.
But I really think there are some positives that come along with it.
You learn from it, you grow, right? And I guess the most important thing, you're never bored, right? Because there's always something going on, right? Your ups and downs, highs and lows.
Yeah, they keep you, yeah, they keep you busy, and I also think they keep you in check a little bit of like how you're feeling and kind of being in tune with your emotions, which sometimes we just don't do in life. And so I think that is like a positive takeaway of imposter syndrome is you are connected to your core more to say like, okay, these are the things I'm feeling. Why am I feeling it? Versus in other life experiences, we tend to suppress. We tend to sweep things under the rug. I mean, I'm Eastern European. We're from Serbia, and a lot of times, like emotions and the way you feel isn't really something that we share. I think there's a lot of other countries, a lot of different ethnicities and cultures who can resonate with that in their family dynamic. And so when you are able to speak to a therapist or a coach, like at the end of the day, not only does it make you feel better, but it helps prepare you for what you're going to deal with your children as well. And I think that like all the things we've talked about today, like I keep thinking to myself, like now I can be a better parent when I notice my child is also in situations, whether it be in sports or in school, where I'm noticing like, hey, they're feeling X, Y, and Z. Like, what can I do to help coach them through this? Because of course it's inevitable that they're going to deal with that as they embark in their adulthood.
Absolutely. And the whole emotional intelligence, adults assume to know it, but in reality, I guess it's a new journey for a lot of adults.
Hmm.
because we will learn about how to recognize emotions, how to deal with emotions, right? And also, kids are always watching, so we are the role models for our kids, right? And we want to make sure that we're doing a good job. But sometimes they can teach us a lot as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it brings us to like the other point of like, what is like too much emotion, right? Like, you know, um, is there a point where it's like, okay, we need to scale it back, right? Like we've gone a little bit too far into how I'm feeling, and maybe that, I mean, you know best, like maybe that could also be like where we don't want to go. It's like if we're feeling too many emotions, we're analyzing too many emotions, we're going down this rabbit hole of like, now I feel this and now I feel this and what am I doing? Like I also feel like that probably would be very overwhelming as well.
It can be, yeah, and absolutely. You can maybe even like map your emotions, right? You can create like that was a good experience, that was enough, that was like a little bit overwhelming, right? So you have some points of reference. When you're in that situation, you can pinpoint and say like, this is how I can respond differently.
Right, right. Like I know somebody in my family who once they began like seeing a therapist, it was like we began to notice that like the emotions were just so high and like they had changed so much that
Mhm.
we were almost like we don't know them anymore, right? Like who are you? Who have you become? And it was really because they connected back to all these different emotions that they were feeling, that they encountered so much growth that they changed, right? They evolved. And so that's kind of what prompted me to ask the question, because I think there are times in our lives where we notice people kind of go down that route. And sometimes as the other individual who's kind of watching that journey, you kind of think to yourself, like, wow, what did analyzing all of their emotions do to who they are?
Absolutely. So, and as we start wrapping up, let's give some last words of advice to our viewers, maybe something that you took away from this conversation and you can use at, the Mrs. World pageant. What do you think?
Well, I learned a lot, to be honest with you, from today's call. So I feel like I have like a really long list of things. But I think one of the things you had mentioned was just in my mind thinking about imposter syndrome as like a whole, like disconnecting it from myself. Like when you were talking about negative Nancy, like that's one thing I really want to exercise as well. Yeah, I think that's a really great tip that I want to take away from tonight's call. And one of the things that I would love to just share is that, in moments of imposter syndrome, while it may feel like you're in a dark tunnel and you don't see the end, of course, there's one saying I always love to say, and it's this too shall pass.
Mhm.
I hope people can just keep that very close to their heart wherever they are in their life and whatever they're dealing with. Just know this too shall pass. It always does. Even with imposter syndrome, you may be feeling stuck or anxious or angry or whatever it may be, but just know that there are ways to get through it, and that after it rains, it always shines. So I just hope that that's one little nugget that they'll keep with them.
Absolutely. And don't forget to have fun, right?
Yeah.
Important is what's the point? Because remember, what kills the joy of now? That's when we dwell in the past and worry about the future. So we need to focus on now, recenter ourselves, and enjoy the experience, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're never going to be in this particular moment ever, right? Once in a lifetime. So when you go on that stage, do your best and don't worry about anything because
Exactly.
you are awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. No, I love that, and having fun. I got to keep that close to me too.
Yep, because I feel like what happens as we grow older, we forget to have fun,
Yeah.
right? We tend to be in our negative mindset, right? And then we tend to see all the things that are not going well, right? We expect it to be good. And
Mhm.
then we notice the bad things. But then now we need to flip it and say, hey, listen, we're doing well. Out of the 10 things, 9 went well. That's a good result. It's a passing grade, right?
Absolutely.
So, and as we finish the show, is there anything else you would like to share with the viewers?
No, I mean, I think thank you so much for having me. It definitely was a eye-opening experience. I learned, I felt, I feel like this is a really big moment, not just for myself, but I really hope the viewers also were able to resonate with what they're going on, what's going on in their life as well. And if I could be a friend to anybody, I am obviously always here. But thank you so much, Anna, so much for all the education and resources. I think it was really phenomenal being able to speak with you.
Thank you for joining us here and sharing all your amazing stories. And thank you for viewing us. We are here on Mondays, 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be back in 2 weeks. And then if anything resonated with you, please reach out at www.nlmft.com or Jess TV. We would love to hear from you, and thank you for watching.